talks of a unilateral declaration of a Palestinian state, domestic politics, risk of a wider war, and rewarding Iran. The Middle East has been in constant turmoil since the Hamas attack on southern Israel on October 7th. The fighting, at various intensities, has extended from the Gaza Strip, northern and southern Israel, southern Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Jordan, Yemen, Pakistan, Iran, and the Red Sea. The primary combatants have been Israel, various Iran-backed proxies such as Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, the Islamic State, the U.S., and the UK. The West has experienced near constant domestic protests, particularly intense and enduring in the UK and the US, supporting the Palestinian cause. In the background of the turmoil of the events starting October 7th, the US and UK are exploring the establishment of a Palestinian state immediately after the war in the Gaza Strip ends. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has requested that the State Department to conduct a review of the Palestinian issue and formulate Palestinian statehood options to present to the administration. Blinken insists that this does not indicate a change in U.S. policy regarding Israel and the Palestinian Authority, the PA, but the criteria being discussed is a clear break from the traditional U.S. policy towards Israel. New York Times columnist Thomas Friedman calls the policy under discussion at the State Department as, quote, the Biden Doctrine for the Middle East, end quote. The Biden Doctrine is also getting support from British Foreign Secretary Lord David Cameron, who is aligned with the State Department proposal. The details are still in discussion, but the overall direction is that the U.S. and UK would unilaterally declare the recognition of a Palestinian state upon the cessation of the Gaza war. The U.S. and UK would allow a Palestinian state to be recognized at the United Nations without the threat of either country using the veto power to stop it. This is a complete change from the traditional approach to the Palestinian statehood, which would have had all points between Israel and the Palestinians negotiated prior to the U.S. and international recognition of a Palestinian state. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and 66% of the Israeli public oppose the idea of a Palestinian state created by this method. Any Palestinian state creation has a majority opposition in Israel, especially after the October 7th attacks. The preferred Israeli approach would be to normalize relations with the Muslim countries in the region and eventually leverage the diplomatic ties and then settle the Palestinian issue. The contention by Blinken and Cameron is that the cycle of violence cannot continue and that a Palestinian state is the way forward to ending the Middle East conflict. Saudi Arabia has stated that Palestinian statehood is now a requirement for the normalization of diplomatic ties with Israel, using the Abraham Accords format. Prior to October 7th, Saudi Arabia did not have this Palestinian statehood requirement. Blinken and Cameron are relying on this to be the way forward in the peace process. This approach means that there will be no direct negotiations between Israel and the Palestinian Authority prior to the declaration, so it is not assured that either side will accept it. Would the declaration start a war between Israel and the PA? For example, no direct negotiation means no borders have been defined. Just as the UN Declaration of an Independent Israel in 1948 started a war between the new state and Israel and its Arab neighbors the day after the UN Declaration. Direct negotiations would have to take place between the two parties eventually, whether through a conflict or to avoid one. There is also no requirement from Blinken or Cameron to require the PA to confirm the Israeli right to exist after the Gaza war and make that policy law within the Palestinian state. Will the Palestinian benefactors accept an admission of a right of Israel existent? Or will this be an opportunity to set up operations within Palestine to continue the conflict, but this time closer to Israel? Again, increasing the likelihood of war. A unilateral declaration leaves a series of open questions, such as who is responsible for Palestinian security? How will the West Bank get access to the outside world? Would Israel maintain the international border with Jordan? What if all the points cannot be successfully negotiated between Israel and Palestine? Then what? The Palestinians and Israeli state Jerusalem as their capital. So will Jerusalem be split? Obviously, the State Department and the Foreign Ministry must know this, so any unilateral declaration of a Palestinian state before negotiations between the Israel and the PA risk a conflict. And are Cameron and Blinken willing to accept that? Or do they plan to impose a peace between the two states? Another cost of this policy is that declaration of a Palestinian state after the end of the Gaza war would be a reward to Hamas for attacking Israel, killing civilians, and taking hostages. The linking the end of the Gaza war with the declaration of a Palestinian state would incentivize future violence to attain their ends against Israel. It would also reward Iran, who funded and coordinated the Hamas attack on Israel, used Hezbollah to threaten a wider war with Israel, and used the Houthis to conduct attacks on Israel and international shipping in the Red Sea, including routine firing upon U.S. Navy ships. Friedman writes that the Biden doctrine would have a strong stance against Iran, but this is nonsensical. Even if one ignores the billions of dollars the administration has given to Iran, which eventually led to funding its proxy operations, the granting of Palestinian statehood after the end of the Gaza war will be a win for Iran's destabilizing policies in the region. A Palestinian state created with the linking of the Gaza war only increases the stature and profile of Iran, who has been setting the tempo of the conflict in the region and causing the U.S. to react off its back foot. A Palestinian state that is born from Iran's strategy will show the world that it is the country that forced the U.S. and Israel to bend to its will. Iran will take this newfound stature to continue the conflict with the U.S. and Israel to press for ever greater demands and most likely calls for the destruction of Israel even after the Palestinian state. 2024 is an election year in the U.S. and President Biden is contending with a vocal and energetic pro-Palestinian minority in his party that often violently protests for Hamas and the Palestinians and against Israel and Jews. Both the Muslim and Jewish communities are solid Democratic constituencies, and the continued protests threaten to split the Democratic coalition leading into an election year. Biden needs party unity for his party's election efforts, so he needs to deliver something to his vocal minority, and delivering a Palestinian state immediately that is not conditioned on drawn-out negotiations is needed for the administration. Biden needs to bring an end to the war as soon as possible to allow time to heal the fracture in his party, so both Muslims and Jewish coalitions return to the support of the party in November. The UK is also dealing with violent protests, and Lord Cameron needs quick settlement to pacify the large, restive Muslim minority in his country. Palestinian statehood has become just as much a domestic issue as an international one. The driving factor for the Biden doctrine seems to be more political than one to ensure a long-term peace in the region. It only emboldens Iran and its proxies and punishes Israel by determining its fate through fiat and not negotiations. It is no secret that Biden and Obama have deep loathing of Netanyahu for his opposition of both administrations attempting to build ties with Iran. So this is also a way to punish and humiliate him and hope it weakens him politically. This also rewards Iran and emboldens it to continue its current policies of terror and destabilization. Unilateral recognition of is a crude and cynical attempt to buy off the turbulent protests in the U.S. ahead of the election and contains a reckless risk of a continuing war.